probably and a half years to have an election, to the possibility of an election. That means that if we are going to prevent a worst case scenario from happening, and I'm using the words purposefully, that if the opposition is going to enable the country to prevent a worst case scenario from happening, and the worst case scenario I mean is General Museveni succeeding himself, or even enabling his monarchical intentions, the opposition must engender a framework in which it has a common voice, and that voice must transcend color and creed. It's not the preserve of the opposition to talk about reforms. We need wide-ranging electoral and constitutional reforms, effectively saying that if the next cycle of electioneering is going to be purposeful, intentional, and therefore with the consequence of giving the country a new direction, it must be preceded by wide-ranging constitutional and electoral reforms. It's those reasons for which I have been consulting and meeting a number of stakeholders. I have gone out of my way to speak to individual colleagues in the parliament from across the political strata, including those belonging to NRM, independents. And we are gearing up to a framework, a forum of members of parliament, civil society, and other stakeholders to engender a wide-ranging national debate on constitutional and electoral reforms. I have also heard from colleagues in the opposition that say that all we need is a free and fair election. We don't have to have reforms. I dare say that that's an invitation for another round of circus, political circus, in 2025 or 2026, therefore. So the opposition must deliberate. So are we sure that in the current electoral framework and the current constitutional order, a mere election will transform and change the country into the kind of durable constitutional democracy that we desire? My sense is that no, we need to be deliberate, get out of our closet, reach out to each other, bury our hatchet, get out of our small clouds, open the cloud for all sorts of bulls, for us to be able, with sincerity, talk to each other about the possibilities. Otherwise, for me, a mere return to an election will be a circus and will be a recipe for surrender. For example, how do you deal with an election, with a new electoral cycle, without addressing major contradictions that have become a major debate in this country? You follow as well as I do the questions that have arisen in the political space, for which citizens need answers. These answers cannot be settled or provided by a mere election being organized as a ritual. You have heard, for example, Ugandans are concerned about the size of our parliament. That actually our parliament is too big for a small economy. And I agree. And for me, this is not a new arena. Over the last couple of years, even when I was still LOP, I talked about these reforms, including reforms that will go a long way in reducing the size of parliament to rhyme with the capacity of the nation to support a sizable, purposeful, and useful parliament. People have talked about this. How do you achieve it without meaningful constitutional reforms and electoral reforms? We have spoken about changing the form of electing members of parliament. That the current first past the post does not give the nation the kind of parliament we desire. That probably a new arrangement in the form of proportional representation will give this country a better parliament. The last census, the census for which you have gotten provisional results, have given the country an indication of the structure of our population, in which young people between 17 and 25 years compose the majority. As I speak, we can only guarantee the younger people only 4 positions in the parliament, or probably 5, the 4 regional members of parliament for the youth, and then the woman MP, the youth MP for young women. Only 5 is a guarantee. If we changed to proportional representation and made it mandatory for each party to nominate a particular percentage of youth with categories, you can have 50 youth MPs in parliament or even more. Same thing with women. So I think we need to confront these issues with sincerity as a nation, and this is being corridor talk. So I am going to be leading the onslaught, at least in Parliament. I have spoken to other party platforms, not all, but I'm still consulting, so that we join together. It's not about me, it's not about my friends, it's about this country. And these, for me, are issues for which the opposition and other leaders that need a new Uganda, civil society, cultural institutions, religious institutions, must be offered a platform to speak to. How do you address, for example, the issue of Ugandans in diaspora who would like to have their voice heard in our elections? These are Ugandans in their thousands, if not millions, that subscribe to Uganda as home, but have no say in how the country makes a choice for leadership. Without meaningful electoral reforms, how do you guarantee their participation in the elections? These are the issues that we need to confront. I am aware of other nations in Africa in which the diaspora votes. So can the opposition run away? Can the political actors run away from the influence and impact of the diaspora and may provide a platform for their participation in the next elections? Otherwise, merely mentioning the volume of their remittances that support our small budget is not enough. We must make them an integral part of decisions in leadership in this country. And for me, it's a matter for which we must have an open conversation. How do we talk about decentralization now? We all know and agree that decentralization has actually failed. The last round of activity in Parliament, which composed of rationalization of government agencies, was an admission of the failure of this form of governance, which is decentralization in part. So the country must discuss any form of power sharing. The country must be able to discuss any form of devolution of power so that resources are shared properly. The country is discussing corruption at all levels of government, at all strata. So how do you guarantee that you decongest the center where corruption has taken root and be able to ensure that resources go to the people in their regions? Proportionately, people get resources depending on their contribution to the national budget, but also equalize for those regions that are still lagging behind without a proper framework in the Constitution that guarantees devolution. So these must be debated and discussed. How do you go into an election without discussing the way the Electoral Commission is composed in a multi-party democracy? We may not achieve everything at a single go, but the opposition must lead an onslaught, must offer leadership in a honest conversation about the role of the Electoral Commission. How do you go into an election when you have a president that is in the evening of his career and life without properly discussing the transition? So, what form of transition? You remember the Dr. Lumibayiga bill that failed from the 9th Parliament, the presidential transition bill. It's high time this conversation returned on table to be part of the national conversation on how you transition from one person to the other. You witnessed an election in the UK in which a party lost, and on the same day a transition took place. So how can we be a pack of gamblers? We're not discussing democracy and transitions. There's no doubt the NRM or General Museveni will leave power. So should the transition be chaotic, how do we ensure? Who is the guarantor of democracy? Who guarantees that? General Museveni can guarantee his power by holding on to the gun. That's why in a guarantee without a constitutional framework the way transition as a country, and guarantee that the transition will not be chaotic, and guarantee that all institutions respect the transition. We must have this conversation on table, and it does not end with us. It's not a preserve of politicians. How do you really go into another round of election cycle without guarantees on the role of the military? We all know the kind of mayhem military visited on political actors in the last election. Should we simply go back posturing as if nothing happened? As we speak now, the people who disappeared in the last election are still missing. In fact, I should inform the country that I've written to the Right Honourable Speaker about the commitments of government on the missing persons. My thinking earlier was that this was a matter that was going to be pursued by my successors, but seem to be sleeping. The same people were missing after the last election are still missing. I've written to the Speaker and I've retrieved the answer because Parliament deliberated and debated about these people, and there were decisions taken on that day, but there was no follow-up. So I want these issues. So how do you speak to these families of the missing persons? By simply trailing back to go back to the booth and participate in another round of election? Do you even remember that the day that debate took place, we were able to situate a Bannamawulire at CMI, and there was conceding by government that actually they have him? So how come that Bannamawulire is still in detention? Has never been to court? So these issues must return before we can gear up for another, circus of an election. And there must be commitment from all and sundry that the rules of the game must be respected. But most importantly, the rules must be reconstructed for all to participate. They claim, I've heard people saying, no, it's late, let's first just prepare for circus. It's not late, we have time. Unless some people have their brains on holiday in some cases, but if all of us have our brains working 24/7, we have time. I am actually aware that particular drafts of reforms have been made. I recollect the Honorable Mpuuga's bill from the 10th Parliament. We can build on that. The Honorable Segona made submissions in the 9th Parliament. They are available. So it is let's talk. It is talk of the lazy and laggard. It must not be accepted. We must be warmer. We must warm up to a possibility. But all we need is to make sure that as leaders, we invoke everyone. We invite everyone to participate. Not politicians only. All stakeholders, all that are concerned with the future of this country must be given a platform to make their views felt and informed. I thank you. Probably I should respond to any questions if they're there in English before I give a brief Uganda version. But feel free to ask any question that you think is important for my attention to respond to you.
Honorable, relatedly about the electoral reforms, previously the Minister of Constitutional Affairs,
Justice and Constitutional Affairs.
Yeah. He said they don't have money to handle this process, and I think he was referring it to the Uganda Law Reform Commission. Do you think government is willing to take up this process?
I dare say that whoever raised the flag of money is just misleading the country. For example, did he indicate how much money he needed and that was not available? If we have money to dole out to Rocco and others, to Pinetti, why not money to guarantee a constitutional order for this country? So the issue of money should not arise. Money can be found. Money is actually available. It's simply the lousiest excuse, and nobody should buy into that. The Minister of Justice should not be waited for, and we are not going to wait for the Minister to act. As members of Parliament, we have a duty. Where the Minister slips on duty, the law allows us to raise private members' bills. Yep.
Mine is not about money, but it's about the tactics they have put at play. Actually, if you look at the other bill that was tabled by, that was supposed to be tabled by Honorable Kabashai on reducing the size of Parliament, I think the excuse has been that the Law Reform Commission is scrutinizing, but it's taking ages to to, get to the end. Don't you think part of your very beautiful proposals may suffer the same fate?
This is all politics stupid, as they call it. What really must be at the front is the will. As long as the country rises to make these issues pertinent and part of our national agenda, the money will be found. The reform will act like there's no tomorrow, and whoever has the duty will act. There's nothing like a surgery there. The issues we want to rectify are well known and well documented. Besides, we are not reinventing the wheel. Others have done so. So we are talking about the will to do right, to avoid a scenario where the transition is very difficult, is chaotic, because it's inevitable. The country must transition. I have heard some actors talking about a government of national unity as part of the transition. But how do you do that without going into a conversation that is open and enable citizens to participate and speak to us about what they don't like and what they like to avoid chaos? So those excuses are simply plastic. We're only inviting for will of actors to do right, and I think it is feasible. We have time, we have resources, we have space and knowledge to do that. Yeah.
Maybe lastly, about these electoral reforms. I remember the last time when you were at Mpuuga, you elaborately put them out, and they weren't received, especially by the political group. Never received it passionately. The terrain has not changed. The same actors are still in those positions.
That's why I said in my submission that these reforms are not about politicians. They're about citizens and the desires of citizens. One subject them to the will of the people, and when the people speak, then the politicians must direction from the mirror of the will of the people. When we put a small mirror in which politicians see their mouth and ears, then you can't have reforms. So we want to have a debate. That was a small room for political actors. So they must be subjected to the people. Are people satisfied with the way we function? Are people feeling secure about the transition? Are people feeling secure with the way resources are shared in this country? Do they feel involved? Do they see themselves as a part? So these are the issues that must come to the conversation. Then the actors will see the way. So we must insist. It has nothing to do. When they say they're not interested, but there are those that are interested. So how do we bring them on board? How do we simply avoid going into a political ritual for the sake of an election? Mr. Kajibi, yes.
I have a question on behalf of yours. We have that you've done these electoral reforms, but which approach? Because you're saying that you talk about politicians that the society. Yesterday I saw when President Ruto was signing a certificate, IEBCB, and all of politicians were behind him, just because they realized that there's a GNC that is not concerned about them. So politicians have to unite to make Kenya a better place to be if they want to remain in charge of the country. So, which is a good thing that now there is a third force in Kenya, the GNC who are not political aligned to any organization. So Uganda, in Ugandan perspective, people seem to be so detached from even engaging in the political discourse. People seem to be so bored about politics, like they are not interested. How can Ugandans how can we ignite their appetite for politics in Uganda here? Because now people go for small things like there's money here, let's go. But issues to do with democracy, improving democracy, electoral reforms is a very boring debate in Ugandan community. What do you have?
I think you need to understand the genesis of your question. A 40-year rule can actually cause boredom. Children that were born 40 years ago, some have always gotten grandchildren. And all they have known is a regime that has thwarted all manner of change and reform. Because there has been an attempt to engender change using political means through contest, a contest that has been thwarted variously, so it is reason to cause apathy and frustration. The political class has a duty to ignite this fire and return the interests of citizens by ensuring that they communicate hope. This conversation must communicate hope to citizens and therefore invite their involvement and participation that tomorrow is going to be better that if mistakes have been made in the past, the future must posit hope and promise to the young people. That's the message that should be filtering through these conversations. My interest is that these conversations must return to the table, and we must listen to the people, hear from them, and therefore we should be able to find our bearing. You see, the problem with the political actors is believing that they are eternal. There's no eternal political actor. We transition. This service space is not eternal, it's not ordained, and therefore we can only be performing our duty as we subsist at the moment. So the whole issue of what we learn from Kenya and the interest of the young people there, probably our political culture is a bit different, and we need to understand that. But that should not be reason for the young people in Uganda to remain apathetic and disinterested, and only interested in picking up phones and sharing pornography and what. They should be interested. The question they ask on social media should translate into activity and active involvement in what is being done, and they should be able to ask questions and demand for answers.
Maybe you can conclude with these two. One, when are we starting with the electoral reforms? When is the consultations starting? And then two, recently you were in Masaka. There is a statement you made. Some people got it the way they like it. Could you comment on that statement about the drunkenness and marijuana consumption? Maybe people will get you right, or you will prove those who got the message wrong.
Well, first of all, the consultations should begin in earnest. But I'm trying to speak to a number of stakeholders to get a framework, because it's not about my face and my personal involvement, but the interest and participation of all considered stakeholders. Probably that will be able to warm up the population to the possibilities, instead of waiting for polling day, which for me is unacceptable and something that I really think will be a very bad thing for Uganda, that is transitioning from a personal rule to a possible democracy if we engendered the requisite reforms, constitutional and electoral. Constitutional especially because the country needs a new consensus. I have said severally before that the current constitution was mutilated. It was predicated on a two-term president. It never was the wish of the framers of the constitution that we'll have a life presidency. So the predicate has since collapsed. So the country needs a new consensus on governance, power sharing, and the rest. So that consensus must come from a consultative process in which citizens at various strata participate without limitation. Your second question, I don't think I need to really hazard a lot in trying to answer that, because we have a lot to do. And I'd rather that we concentrate on the issues that are going to add clout to our obligation in the current space. If you're going to really spend a lot of time in exchanges that do not really help us as leaders, I don't think it's very necessary. It only serves to undermine our effort as leaders, and I think going forward we have learned from people choosing each other, this and that. We now know the idiosyncrasies, the contradictions, the biases. We know that. That should really never deter us from doing right. I'd rather that we do that. Probably the past month will enable us going forward to peel back so many layers of contradictions, ignorance, misinformation, blackmail. I'd rather that we do not really take a lot of time to go into those small side shows, because eyes must be on the ball. If we don't do that, then we are only allowing the country, we're telling people that we are preparing the country for a worst case scenario that I talked about in my preamble of self-succession and a monarchical arrangement in our constitutional order, which I detest. Thank you. Okay. Mu bufunze nabayise okweyambisa emikutu gino okwogera ku nsonga 3 mu bufunze. Esooka sifunanga mukisa mutongole kwebaza nakulisaayo bannayuganda bonna ku lw'amaka gange, ku lwa Bannamasaka abatwegattako nga 21 mukulu gye twategeka okwebaza Katonda ate n'okumusaba. Abantu abatwegattako nga Bannamasaka bantumye okubeebaza ate n'okubasima ddala okuwaayo obudde bwammwe ku lunaku olwali oluzibu, lunaku lwa kukola, ate abaatiniga engendo nga situbawadde transport. Twebaza omutima ogwo ogw'obwa Sseruganda obwa nnyinoomu tugwebaza, era bansabye mbagambe n'okubasaba mugukuume. Okusaba okwo nga twakutegeka kwali kusaba mu mbeera yaffe ne mu butonde bwaffe ne mu nkuza yaffe, bubeerako n'ekikusanyusiza osaba era naweebaza, oba n'ekikusoomooza era okola kyekimu. N'olwekyo twebaza abatwegattako ku lunaku olwo mu bungi obwo, ate n'okubeera abantu ab'emirembe obwenkanidde awo. Ensonga ey'okubiri era nga eva ku mukolo ogwo, bukya tuvaayo bannayuganda bangi Ssekinnoomu mu bibiina ebyobwannakyewa eby'ebyobufuzi, Bannamawulire badde bankubira nga bambuuza wakola statement naye tuwatuuli engeri gy'ogenda kugenda nayo mu maaso ku biki ebirina okukolebwa nakyo ekiddako. Ensonga ya kiki ekiddako ndowooza yebadde kutaakati. Kyenjala okubagamba nti bukyanvaayo nagenda mu maaso, bukyatumala omukolo ogwo nagenda mu maaso okusinkana abantu bangi. Ndowooza buli lunaku nsinkana abantu ab'ebika ebyenjawulo ebisukka 10 buli lunaku olukya, naye nga ndi mu kwebuuza, si kwebuuza ku lwange nti nyina kyempisaawo, naye okwebuuza kubanga obuvunanyizibwa bwe nnyina mu makkati g'abannayuganda mbumanyi era mbutegeera bulungi, ate sinze nabwe essaamu bwe baba bunteekamu. Okwebuuza ku biki ebisoboka. Tusigazizza ebbanga lya mwaka gumu n'emyezi nga bwe gityo okubanga twesanga mu kiseera ekyokulonda obukulembeze obupya mu Uganda ku mitendera egy'enjawulo. Ensonga eyo nagikoonako naye ne ŋŋamba nti okubeera okwayo kijja kuba kya bunafu nnyo ffe abaagala okukyusa Uganda ogenda obugenzi mu kalulu ng'omukolo obukolo ogwakiyita mu lujja. Twabaddeyo akalulu, twaketabyemu, twafunyeyo ababaka ba palamenti, netufunayo bammeeya ne bakansala, tuli basanyufu nnyo. Ndowooza si kyekigendwa ky'ebyobufuzi ekyobwebange. Ekigendwa ky'ebyobufuzi kukyusa bulamu bw'abantu, kukyusa ndowooza z'abantu, nakulaba nti eggwanga likuumibwa nga lirina emirembe, nga ne bannansi bagenda mu maaso ate ng'obuyinza bwabwe babusigazizza. Okwebuuza okugenda mu maaso kuli ku nsonga enkulu 2. Okulaba nti situgenda mu kalulu akaddako nga situfunye ssemateeka mupya, nga situgenda mu kalulu oyinza okugamba ssemateeka omupya oba ennongoosereza ez'omuggundu mu ssemateeka aliwo, kubanga ssemateeka aliwo nzikiriza nti yatemwatemu obulere. Bwebeera nnyumba basooka kugyamu luggi ne bajjamu amadirisa, oyinza okugamba nti wetwogerera kifulukwa. Ekifulukwa ekyo tosobola gamba nti mujja kuyingira bikonkome, misota na minya na bikere, kubanga emyaganya weeyiri. Okusobola okuddabo ssemateeka yakolebwa mu 95 yakolebwa ng'ennonoye ya president agenda okumala ebisanja 2. Era twaliwo okwerumaaluma nti ne weweera mu byotya ebisanja 2 we biggweerako tuba tukoze eki, tuba tukuwonye. Tibalowoozaako nti bajja kubeerawo omuntu akwata obuyinza agambe nti nze okutuusa okufa amiina. Ekyo kasa twajjaho ebisanja kuba president oyo ssemateeka. Okwo okukkanya kw'abannayuganda abaali mu ssemateeka abakola ssemateeka oyo kuba kuyiise, kubanga eyo y'empagi enkulu eyawakati Sseddugge eyali yeesibye ssemateeka oyo. Bw'otunulira n'ennyanjula ya ssemateeka ffe bannayuganda abayise mu busambattuko, omuli okuyiwa omusaayi, omuli obwa Sologumba, omuli obwaki, ebigambo bingi nnyo. Kitegeeza nti abakola ssemateeka baali bakoze okwebuulira. Okwebuulira okwo kulabika kwatyoboolwa. Abaagala Uganda egende mu maaso ng'ekola n'ebyobufuzi ebisibaga ssemateeka ow'abaana n'abazzukulu, ssemateeka alina okuddamu okutuulirwa. Eyo ensonga esooka. Ayogere ku bintu bingi nnyo omuli ebisanja, omuli okugabana obuyinza. Tukkiriza nti enkola ya decentralization eriwo ku ssaawa eno yasigala ku lupapula naye mu nkola yayiika. Enkola y'emirimu nfu, entambuza y'ensimbi nfu, abawa ensimbi ennyingi mu musolo be bafuna ate ekitono ennyo mu musolo. Tukakasa tutya nti ensimbi y'omuwa omusolo eganyirwa abo abagiwa, ebitundu ebisigalidde nti biyambibwa okugenda mu maaso ng'okyalina ssemateeka ayogera ku decentralization efaanako bw'etyo nga teriimu na garanti nti osobola okuwulira omukulembeze w'eggwanga oba Ssaabaminisita ng'ali wantu n'agamba nti mmwe mwalonda bubi abeeyo kyemudde mutafuna services. Kiba kitegeeza waliwo ekizibu ennyo mu ngabana y'obuyinza n'enkola y'emirimu. So ensonga ezo n'endala zeetaagisa okuzzaayo mu lukale. Bannayuganda baweebwa omukisa ebbanga liiseewo ddene okuddamu okutunuulira bye baagala bikyuke mu ndagaano yaabwe, kubanga ssemateeka ndagaano y'Abannayuganda so si ndagaano y'abannabyabufuzi. Ekyokubiri, ensonga nnyingi ezikwata ku byokulonda. Ekimu ku biri mu ssemateeka bye ndowooza nti birina okuteesebwa kasindagenda ku kyakubiri ye Parliament. Ebbanga lino Parliament yakubiddwamu nnyo tooki emu mu butuufu ate endala mu butamanya. Ekyo kino kirekera Bannayuganda babenga babuuza ebibuuzo bafune answers. Kasaba bange kibabuuza kirina omusingi nga tekisibagiddwa mu bukyayi nange eridembe sobola dibajjako. Parliament ya Uganda bagyemulugunyizaako ababaka bangi nnyo abagasa batono. Sera kituuse tuze ku mmeeza size ya Parliament n'ennunda yaayo. Bawadde ekyokulabirako nti abavubuka mu kubala abantu okuwedde kizuuliddwa nti abavubuka myaka 17 ku 25 basinga obungi. Naye mu Parliament mulimu bameka? Mu Constitution eriwo n'enkola eriwo abavubuka osobola bawa garanti ababaka 5 bana abava mu buli kitundu ate n'omuwala owa Uganda yonna. Kiba kitegeeza nti abantu abasinga obungi ate bakiikirwa kitono. Mu nkola ennungamu singa ababaka balondebwa okusinziira ku bungi etuyita proportional representation, tusobola okukola etteeka eriwaliiza buli kibiina okuba ne percentage y'ababaka nga bavubuka. Mu nkola eriwo tusobola kiwako garanti n'abakyala bwe batyo. So ndowooza okubaganya ebirowoozo debate ku nsonga ya Parliament nga bwefaanana ne baani abagirimu yalwawo dda. Ababaka b'amagye bakyakola ki mu Parliament? Ezo ensonga zeetaaga zikubaganyizibweko. Kujje eritugambibwa nti kali liri professional, abaka bakyakola muki. Lwaki b'amagye? Lwaki si ba prisoners? Lwaki si ba police? Lwaki si ba LDU? Bwe tuba bakunyweza demokrasiya agoberera amateeka ate nga tugamba nti tulina civilian government, eyo debate ereetaaga ekomewo. Parliament erimu ebintu bingi nnyo ebyetaaga okukyusa mu ngeri gyerondebwamu n'engeri ababaka gye bakiikirwamu. Waliwo n'abalina ebirowoozo nti Parliament tutuuse tube ne Parliament 2. Parliament eyawamu ey'abangi eyitibwa Lower House ate ne Parliament enkulu eyitibwa Upper House oba Senate. Era bawa n'ebirowoozo nti Parliament Senate ebirimu ababaka nga 39 bokka nga bakiikirira districts eziri original ezaaliwo sonna bakola ssemateeka wa 95. Ensonga eyo eri mu ddiiro naye eyogerwako ku platform ki? Tujogereko mu birabo bya mwenge, tujogereko mu tax park. Debate eno erina okujja kubanga tubeera wano mu Parliament n'owulira ababaka ba Parliament nga bali mu kukayanira ensonga z'ensalosalo z'ebyalo. Bubeebeera ne Upper House mu nsi ezimu esobola okukola ku nsonga za equalization, regional, sub-ethnic and group issues nga zeeriko. Eyo debate ejja ddi ne tugamba tusale Parliament eya wansi tutekewo Parliament entono eya waggulu. Abalala abaagala ebyobufuzi ebyobukiise bagende ku regional governments. Giyite nga bw'ogyagala. Osobola ziyita counties, osobola ziyita federal states. Debate erina okujja. Simanyi lwaki bannabyabufuzi bagyewala nga bagyogerako bwogezi mukama na kuyita buyisi mu luggya. ekigendo ky'ebyobufuzi kukyusa nsi kukola kituufu kugolola bisobye nyina okulowooza nti ebintu bingi bisobye emyaka egiyise egisukka mu 3 omulembe guno gulina okufuna consensus empya singa oddayo ku bantu abakola ssemateeka wa 95 oyinza okwesanga nga 3/4 tekyaliwo eyali consensus yaabwe kwali okukkaanya kwabwe mu 95 okukkaanya kwabwe omulembe guno kwekuliwa yensonga lwaki twetaaga ssemateeka omulongoose ayogera ku ddoboozi eppya enkola empya n'ebintu ebipya okusinziira ku ki ebiriwo roolo y'amagye mu kulonda amagye gakola ki mu kulonda akakyoko ebyokulonda kateekebwawo katya mpulira n'abagamba nti ensonga zino nkulu nnyo naye obudde bugenze eno endowooza ya bunafu obudde tebusobola kugenda nga oyagala kukola kituufu obudde busobola kugenda nga tolina mutima gwagala kukola kituufu obudde bwe buli olwo n'abogera ku ssente teziriiwo ne ssente weeziri bwe basobola okufuna obukadde 3 obuwumbi 3 ne tubuwa omuntu omu agende atereze bizinesi ye basobola kunoonya buwumbi 5 kukola mateeka aganaakuma abaana n'abazzukulu n'okusigaza essuubi ly'abannayuganda nti uganda ejja kukyusa obukulembeze esigale ng'etambula nga tewaliwo mbeera yonna yaddukadduka mu kiseera kino tetusobola kugamba nti tugende mu kalulu kubanga tukaagala nnyo nga tukatwalanga mukolo nga n'ebizibu ebyaliwo mu kalulu akaggwa tebinnaba kuvaawo ng'ekibuzaawo bantu njagala kubategeeza nti nawandiikidde dda sipiika nga mujjukiza paalamenti bye yasalawo nga nkyali loopu ku bantu abaabulawo abantu abaabuzibwawo ensonga ezaali mu kutyoboola eddembe ly'obuntu ku myalo ensonga z'abasibe abali mu makomera nga tebawoza mujjukira bulungi paalamenti yatuula nesalawo eggoye ku nsonga ezo mu motions 3 danaita ku floor ya paalamenti era mujjukira bulungi nti mu dibeeti eyo omu ku basibe be twazuula yali ddamulira gwe twazuula nti ali ku CMI kyakakasibwa yakyuka eddembe ly'obuntu akamukyala wangadya poliisi n'ekikakasa mujjukira statement ya mwami Onyango